Now, one of the ways I can really help you is if I teach you to stop shoulding on yourself, and also to stop shoulding all over others. And that means to reduce the instances in which you think and say, I should, I shouldn't, I should have, he should, she shouldn't, they should have. That's shoulding all over the place. I'll give you a few recent examples from my own real life coaching work. I had a student the other week. The guy is a multi-millionaire. I mean, he's set for life. No problems in the world, completely healthy, wonderful family, and still he keeps shoulding all over himself all the time. For example, he tells me, I shouldn't be gaming so much. I've been doing a lot of computer gaming and I shouldn't do that because gaming is unproductive. I wish I didn't do it, but I do it anyway, and I shouldn't. And that's his example of shoulding. You have yours from your own life. And it just so happens that this shoulding on himself will not lead him to quit gaming. On the contrary, it's going to perpetuate the guilty pleasure. So I said to him, before you were rich, why did you want to become rich in the first place? And he said, so that I have plenty of time. And then I said, you mean plenty of time to do gaming? And he realized that originally he wanted to become rich so that he could attract the right girl and so that he could game all he wants. And he's still depriving himself of both. And we had a good laugh about that. His becoming rich did not get rid of this poor mentality of pressuring himself. And one of the effective ways to approach shoulding on yourself is to release the resistance toward it. And one of the most effective ways to release resistance toward a thing is to come up with things you appreciate about it. So I said to him, you know, gaming is not entirely unproductive. And he said, how so? And I said, well, you're practicing strategy, focus, coordination, reaction. In some games, you're practicing teamwork. You're practicing to keep a calm mind under pressure. It's all not entirely unproductive. If you can take these skills that you learn in gaming into real life, it's in fact very productive. And what I was trying to do is release that resistance, that he's wasting his life away, wasting his time. And that's called a reframe. We were reframing the activity of gaming. And of course, there's a lot of bad things you could say about it, but there's also good things you could say about it, as with everything. So I wasn't lying to him. I was simply using a different context, a different frame. And then I told him I'm also a gamer, but not the way he thinks. I like to play racket sports, different types of racket sports. And in a sense, that's also gaming because I'm practicing the same skills. keeping calm in difficult situations, goal orientation, strategy, risk, focus, open attention, all of these things. But I prefer outdoor gaming because it gives me physical fitness too, to sitting in front of a computer. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. I also told him I enjoy outdoor paintball in the woods because many of the games he plays are shooting games. And I said, well, if you like shooting and the boy in you very much does like shooting, then you can express that in paintball in the woods. Why not? If it's well organized, it can be a lot of fun. So you see the approach here, the coaching approach was to first release resistance toward the activity and then pivot towards something perhaps even better. The bottom line is, if he starts embracing it instead of shoulding all over himself, you should, you shouldn't, you should have not, then he's going to regain control of the activity. Now, believe it or not, the guilt is not going to stop the gaming. It's going to perpetuate it, because guilt is in the assumption that you're going to do it over and over again, and there's no end to it. And of course, we also had shoulding from others. Others were shoulding on him, telling him what he should and shouldn't be doing. And the pressure from others, not only regarding gaming, but everything in his life, led him to rebel against their shoulding and to game more than he has to, or even wants to. Then once we released that resistance and embraced gaming, we're okay with it, it was easier to pivot to something better, because what he really wants is to be in control of it. He does want to game, but he doesn't want to go all day. He wants to be able to switch it on and off. He wants to have gaming instead of gaming having him. And there's nothing wrong with that. The mind needs phases of relaxation, of non-focus, non-work, or a different type of focus, which gaming is. And the mind also enjoys challenge. And if you lack challenge in everyday life, then you need to get artificial challenge, which is what sports and gaming is. If we as a civilization don't want to go to war, then we need to express this desire for challenge in better ways. And sports is one of the ways to do that. Gaming is another. And yes, of course, there's always worse and better ways to express that, but it is a desire inherent in human nature. Another example of shoulding was a recent female student who told me, I wish I were nicer to people. I should be nicer to people. I shouldn't be grumpy. I should be nice. And guess what that leads to? If she feels obliged that she has to be nice, it leads to fake niceness instead of authenticity. And authenticity is actually, in the long run, much more pleasant than fake niceness. So what's the solution? It's for her to allow herself not to be nice once in a while, not to put any effort, especially if she doesn't like the person that she's communicating with, and especially if she's not in the mood today. I said to her, you don't have to be nice. What makes you think you have to be the same all the time? Human nature is flexible, and we get all these shoulds and shouldn'ts from our idea of how things are supposed to be, ideally, without seeing that Sometimes some situations call for being nice, and some call for not being nice, and some call for being neutral. Being the same all the time is not the way the universe works. You can be 1,000 different ways in between nice and not so nice. So once she allows herself to be authentic, when she's then actually nice, it's going to be real. It's not going to be fake. There's no mask. There's no put on. And then in the next coaching that I had with this woman, I realized that she had turned my advice into another should. I should have been authentic. I should be authentic. She even used the word should. And I pointed it out to her. Anything can be turned into a should. Even shoulding can be turned into a should when you say, I shouldn't should. Fred said, I shouldn't should. And all of that is bull should. I'm asking you to reduce your instances of should, not to never use should again. I use the word should once in a while. What's the problem? The mind is so rigid that anything I tell people can be used to continue your own rigidity. I've seen my teachings become horribly abused. So I'm not surprised when the most beautiful religious teachings are diverted and go south. Any teaching at all can be interpreted in a gentle, spacious manner or in a rigid, this or that thinking manner. So here's the exercise. Write down your shoulds and shouldn'ts that you bestow upon yourself. And also write down some should and shouldn'ts you put on others. I know it's very tempting to should on others, but it's not the most effective way to facilitate change. On the contrary, most people will feel offended whether they admit it or not, thinking, who are you to tell me what I should or shouldn't do, should or shouldn't be? It's not up to you to decide. And then they'll likely consciously or subconsciously rebel and do it anyway. So write down your should and shouldn'ts, also your should haves, on yourself and others. Write down at least one should you put on yourself, one should you put on someone else, one shouldn't you put on yourself, one shouldn't you put on somebody else. One should have you put on yourself, and one should have you put on somebody else. And once you've completed your list, return to this recording. Welcome back. Now we're going to soften things up a little, make things more flexible, less rigid. For every should that you wrote down, I'd like you to reverse it to a shouldn't. So if you wrote down, I should XYZ, you write down reasons that maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe it's good if you don't do it. And for every shouldn't on your list, write down reasons you should do it. Reverse it, find reasons why maybe it's good if you do it. And if you have should haves or shouldn't haves, reverse those too. And none of this, of course, is to say that there's no such thing as good or bad, but things are never either or. They come in many levels of good or bad. And if you become mentally more flexible, instead of labeling everything as good or bad too quickly, paradoxically, you'll get a clear understanding of what's really good or bad. For example, this lady, she genuinely thought not being nice to people all the time is bad. And after she softened her rigid stance a little bit, she realized that not being authentic is even worse. But she didn't see it before that. She didn't see it before we mixed things up a little. So it's an attitude thing. One attitude says should and shouldn't. The other attitude says prefer and don't prefer. Now please don't turn this into the next religion. That's something the rigid mind does, you know. Fred said you shouldn't use should but prefer. I never said that. I said it's an inner attitude. I'm trying to use words to describe an inner attitude that will free your mind. But Fred, you said I should think positively. Actually, I never said that, and I never taught that, and I never wrote that. That is something your rigid mind interprets me as teaching because other people who claim to teach similar teach that. But I've never actually written or taught that you should practice positive thinking. You see, this is a problem with the rigid mind. The rigid mind already has certain preconceptions and beliefs, and without even looking, it already interprets, it already makes right and wrong, good and bad, should and shouldn't, before even observing. Therefore, calmly observing without preconceptions is one of your keys to great power. And with all this should and shouldn't, you cannot calmly observe. And then you also can't find out what's actually going on. If I, as a coach, were sitting with my students and constantly should and shouldn'ting on them, I couldn't see what's actually going on, what's behind everything that they're saying. If you're constantly should and shouldn'ting on world events, instead of calmly observing, you cannot see what's really going on. If you look at social media, you'll see people are very reactive. Something happens, some event supposedly happens, and instantly millions of people are shoulding and shouldn'ting all over the place. And then one day later, it turns out that event either never happened or means something entirely different. News of yesterday. All this shouldn'ting and shoulding is really a waste of energy. Who knows what something is good for? And in a benevolent universe, everything that happens is good for something. So from your limited view, your limited perspective, you can't really say should or shouldn't, because what do you know? Imagine a small group of ants going around proclaiming what should and shouldn't happen. What a waste of energy. What do they know? We're building a playground here that will serve many children. And they're saying, well, this shouldn't happen. But it might lead to them finding a much better place to live. A much more nutritious and wholesome place to live. Who knows? So maybe hold back on judgment until you see the big picture. And again, I'm not saying you should never judge, because that's just another should and shouldn't. You shouldn't judge. There's a time and place for judgment, and there's a time and place also for discernment. It's good to discern between good and bad, or worse and better. The real problem is with judging too quickly before you see the big picture. That's actually one of the advantages of age. With age, most people actually become less quick to draw conclusions. They've just been around long enough and they know things can change, and then they can change again, and then they can revert back, and so forth. With age, they see certain patterns repeating over and over and can pretty much predict certain outcomes. But you can already be this way when you're young. I was this way when I was young. I always liked to observe before I drew conclusions or judged. Things are not always the way they appear to be. But sometimes they're exactly the way they appear to be. If this exercise helped you, share it far and wide.